Okay, and we are recording. All right, so everyone, welcome to our panel today on navigating the thesis process or preparing to thesis. We have invited 4 of your fellow Honors College students here today who have successfully navigated that process, and not only successfully navigated that process, but done it ahead of time, right? Or been able to work that into their timeline. Or have done maybe a creative project or something that's kind of interesting or different. And we think that there's a lot of value in the experience that they've gone through. And we want to allow them the opportunity to share that information with you. So we can be a little too casual maybe sometimes about the thesis process because it's something we get to see students go through all the time. But we know when you're in the process, it can feel a little bit overwhelming when you get released from HC 300 and need to start the thesis process on really what to do, how to get started, and just kind of all of the pieces that come along with that. So we'll move through a few bits of information for you all today, but really the goal is to help you understand what that process looks like and ask questions of students like you instead of always just us coming at you with information, to really hear how they were able to move through this and be successful with their academic research. Okay. So I think everyone here should know each of the individuals, but I'll allow them in just 1 minute a chance to introduce themselves. But what we'll basically be doing today is hosting a panel discussion. So if you've not been to an academic conference where a panel discussion takes place, there's basically a central topic. You invite people who you feel like are experts on that topic, so that's your panel. And then we ask them a couple of structured questions and allow them to share their experience or their expertise. And then you have the chance to add additional questions along the way or at the end. So just a reminder to keep your mic muted if you're not one of the panelists, just because that will help us to minimize background noise. And then you can feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and I'll make sure and look at and moderate that. And then you're allowed to keep your camera off or on, just whatever you feel most comfortable with. Okay. So here is our panel. And so if I put it in alphabetical order by last name, but that's, if you guys have a different order that you would like to introduce yourselves, please feel free. But if you want to take a chance, just letting us know who you are, a little bit about yourself, and maybe some information about your thesis.
Just a quick question, real quick, for the other panelists. Am I the only one that did this in like COVID times?
I think you might have been.
Because I don't have any other people in my picture and I feel lonely.
I know, they all had like their little pin pictures and you didn't get
Yeah, I haven't even seen my advisors.
Saddy.
At least I have a pretty mural to replace them.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, yeah, you did get a lot of good publicity off of yours, so I think we can use that too.
But I miss my, like, where are my awkward looking advisors?
Yeah, where's your, like, we call it the hover hand pictures, where it's like we don't try to touch anybody, so it's like hover hands, like so yes,
I don't even have the pin yet.
during the COVID times.
So I did it during the COVID times. That's warning number 1. My thesis was this mural. I think it had a complicated title, like New Life, the Creative Process Shown Through a Mural. But it's a mural. And my name is Emma Anderson. And my majors are weird. I have a liberal studies with a concentration in pre-med math. I have a computer information systems and a minor in art. So like I didn't really do something related to my major. I just did something because I saw a need for something, which I think is a significant part of the thesis. Like a lot of people feel really inclined to do it. Like I'm majoring in chemistry, therefore it has to be chemistry. But I thought that we needed more murals in commerce, so I made a mural in commerce. So there's a bit more to that. Like I feel like if you find a community need and you address it, it's a different type of thesis, but you definitely still produced something thesis worthy. Is there anything else I need to address?
No, I think that was perfect.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
Well, I'll go next. So my name is Claire Gallagher. I'm a senior in the nursing program. And my thesis was different because it has nothing to do with my major of nursing. I grew up homeschooled, and when I got to the honors college, I found that there were quite a few other homeschoolers as well, which I thought was very fascinating because being homeschooled, you don't really have an option to do honors prior to college. So I found it really interesting that homeschooled students would be interested in an honors program once they got to college. So I chose to do my thesis on that. And it was a qualitative study. It was an exploration of why homeschool students would be interested in an honors college and just kind of their perceptions of the community and their own identity. So it was an interesting topic that I really liked. And so, yeah, that was me.
Hello, you guys. My name's Ruth, and my thesis was very, very technical compared to Emma's and Claire's. Mine's the typical experimental. You're stuck in the lab and you're doing these small things. But what was like I loved about it was like I thought Oakham was really, really cool. I thought it was just a puzzle. So it was like being able to like actually perform what you like write on paper in the class. Like, oh, you're actually creating something and you're verifying it through X, Y, and Z method. And I think the interest in OCHAM was definitely like a priority, like that had to be there, or else I would have hated being in that lab for sure. There was just such long hours. But at the end, I created my big cute molecule, and then I had to test it. And the analysis part was definitely grueling and tedious, but getting to just have that like intellectual banter with your advisor about like, this is yours, you created this, something that's nothing has ever been similar to this except this is your molecule. So I think that's really cool. And my title is really, really long, but you got me to hear that.
Hi, my name is Emma Harris, and I'm graduating this December with double major in English and Spanish. And my thesis was related to one of my majors. So it was entitled Bringing the Beowulf Back, a studying literary adaptation. So basically kind of exploring what adaptation is and how it could be used to sort of make Beowulf popular again. That's the kind of the ultimate goal. So it wasn't necessarily, there wasn't a lot of data that I had, but I read a lot of research articles about adaptation, about Beowulf, and kind of put those together. So more of a qualitative study rather than quantitative, but it was a combination of creative and critical work.
Very cool. And so you can see from just a little bit that our panel has shared about their thesis that there's really no one cookie cutter approach to the thesis, which I think is what's wonderful and liberating about the process, but what is also wildly terrifying about it, because you kind of just want there to be like a plan and you check off like boxes in a certain order and then you're done. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And so they're invited here, honestly, because they each took a completely different approach to their research and what they wanted to create, some within their major, some without, outside of their major, and kind of how they can reflect back on that process and provide some guidance to you all. Okay, so move forward here. So a quick reminder overview, because I know we have people at different phases of the thesis process here. So I wanted to just kind of set a framework before turning it back over to the panel, but that there is coursework that helps you with this. So there's HC 300, which Ms. Yeager usually teaches. The whole point of that class is to help you become familiar with the thesis process, to help you kind of start to formulate ideas, to brainstorm with your peers, to find a faculty advisor, and then you build on that when you register for 491. So you do actually get course credit for proposing your thesis. So coming up with your idea, doing all the background research for your topic, because ideally you're trying to find something kind of like what Ruth mentioned, well, what each of you mentioned. You identified a need in an area that you were interested in. You investigate and realize there's a lack of information or, insufficient information in the topic that you were interested in. And so you actually created that new information. So the proposal is really for you, a chance for you to pitch that idea to your faculty members and the Honors College to say, here's what I think I want to look into. Based on what I've seen in my field, there's nobody doing this. And here's how I think that I can find information that would help me contribute to my field. All right. So you get credit for doing the research that formulates your proposal, and then you earn a grade for that class once your proposal is successfully defended. So once you pitch that idea and everyone gives you feedback on it and says, hey, that's a great idea, or maybe you should look at this or change that, then you actually move forward with carrying out that research project and completing your thesis in 490. So annoyingly, the courses are not in sequential order, and I realize that's very confusing. It predates all of our involvement in the Honors College, and we have no explanation for it, but it's to reward you through academic credit for all of that work that you're doing outside of a traditional class with your research process, okay? So you would take a thesis proposal and then ultimately a thesis defense class. after 300. So also each one of our panelists mentioned a completely different approach to their thesis. So we have a very traditional, like Ruth said, kind of what you think of when you think of undergraduate research, a scientific experiment, analysis. We have Emma talking about, well, both actually kind of a creative work and then a criticism of that. And then Claire running a more qualitative study. And so research can take a lot of different forms, and part of your proposal is to determine what type of methodology you want to use to conduct your research. And so what you're essentially trying to do is to form that investigation into an issue, a lack of information in your field, a question that you've already had, a connection that you've always wanted to make, to establish new facts or create new conclusions that can add to that field. And it can look totally different based on your discipline. So somebody or people often ask, like, how long does a thesis need to be? Well, it depends. Emma, how long was your creative, Anderson, like what you submitted along with your mural ballpark?
So I think my proposal was like 14 pages and my defense was like 16. It was
Okay.
double spaced, for the record.
Okay.
But a lot of what I was writing about was the significance of murals to public areas. So like how it draws foot traffic, how people become interested, and the significance of murals to post offices in particular.
Mhm.
Because of the Great Depression, one of the big movements they made to liven up the general population was painting murals in post offices. So it's kind of funny that mine happened to be on a post office during these times, and it happened to be going up right when there's a lot of USPS issues. So it was like absolute perfect timing to really give me something to write about. But most of mine was talking about why we needed more murals to draw more foot traffic because our downtown needed more color.
Okay, very cool. So Emma Anderson's would coincide more with her kind of founding her creative work in not just a moment in time, but like contextualizing it, right? Like in something bigger. Emma Harris, do you mind sharing about how long your thesis was? So coming from the Literature and Languages department, so academic background of history, you can't say what you need to say in 14 pages, I'm guessing. So what would you talk about kind of the...
When you brought that up, I was like, oh man, how long?
I could see your face. You're like, what?
Yeah,
see, a good chunk of mine was just a photo. So...
Yeah, no photos in mine, so I pulled it up over here for me, and so the final, what I submitted was 91 pages long. So that was the initial critical part, because one of my premises was that to write an adaptation well, you need to understand the original source, the pith of it, the themes, very well, and then also understand your approach. And so that was a big part. Then I wrote my own creative adaptation of Beowulf, and that was about 20 pages. And then I went back and did some final sort of critical work on that to see if I sort of achieved my goals or not. And then I also had a journal that I kept on the side so that my committee could see my process and those kind of things. So all in, it was a little over 90 pages.
Yeah. And so both fantastic and high quality work. I'm not picking on you, Ruth and Claire. I just was thinking of theirs being kind of two of the extremes to look at there, is that, and that doesn't mean that any of that research was less valuable, right? They both still performed at an exceptionally high level. It just means that their product, right, and their process looked different for how they wanted to research. So there's no standard by which, right, like you have to set like this imaginary page number. It's what it takes for you to say what you need to say to support what you're doing, right? And so that process is going to look different for each individual student. All right, so now we're going to start talking a little bit about the thesis proposal. I realize most of you in here are more in the proposal stage, so if that helps you guys as a panel, they would be people who maybe are in 491 or preparing to enroll in 491. And so essentially your proposal is what you'll continue after your work in HC 300, and it's where you start working with your faculty advisor one-on-one to develop your idea, to develop what it is that you want to research. And so this is a document that you'll ultimately write and will be vetted by your advisor, and then you'll complete the pre-proposal defense form and schedule a proposal defense with the honors office. And so this is basically what you're looking for, is a green light to start your research. So you wouldn't actually move forward with your project or your research prior to getting this approval. So why don't you guys take a chance to kind of share with us about how you started or what kind of the first things were that you did after you left HC 300 and when you enrolled in 491 to start preparing your proposal.
I just realized that I completely discounted a huge chunk of my thesis when you asked that. I didn't only write the 6 pages. I made a process video. So instead of writing a process journal, I made a video, which I had apparently completely blocked from my memory until this exact moment.
I knew that you
but I
had
had like a 15-minute long video, like, and it had time lapses and it showed step by step everything that I did. So that's probably why I had less pages.
And
okay,
no diminishing.
Yes. I was just sitting here and I was like, man, I made a video, didn't I? Only like 3 people have seen it. It's super like on the DL. It's cringy, but if you want to watch me paint it real quick, it's kind of fun.
All right, so getting started in 491, what were kind of some of the first things that you did?
I would say for me, I did the majority of my research during 491 at the very beginning. I read several articles every week just to try and make sure I had all the information I needed to put, the proposal together. And as I remember, my proposal was only about 15 pages. It's 10 pages of writing and then the references. But that's where I started keeping a bibliography so that I would be, I could go back and reference what I had used and what I was going to use it for. So really just keeping your sources straight and doing your research up front, that's the biggest part of 491.
Good.
I worked very closely with my advisor, and we were constantly emailing like back and forth every week. I remember I sent her we would set goals for each other. And so she would look for a few articles or a few research things to recommend to me. And then I also would find 5 or 6 articles each week. I'd read them, I'd take notes, and then I'd email them over to her. And then also she was super sweet and she would print stuff out and then hand it to me whenever we met in person. But I think setting up those little goals, especially in the research process, it can be very overwhelming. But just focusing on finding 4 or 5 articles or sources each week that you think might help contribute to you creating your thesis. That was one thing that really helped me in 491.
For me, for my thesis, so biology and chemistry is a little bit different. So you look for your advisor, right? And then you actually start your project before you propose. And we do that because it's very, very important that you are knowledgeable in the sense that you know the techniques that you're using before you go further. You don't have to finish before you propose, but it's just really important to actually see what's on paper and actually be doing it, or else you won't be able to actually defend properly, in the sense that you won't be able to explain the purpose behind why you are doing what you're saying in the paper. And for biology and chemistry, which I had a biology thesis in the beginning and then I switched over to chemistry, so I know both sides. But it really is important to have a really, really good mentor, because technical theses like mine can be very, very toxic if you don't have a good support system by your advisor. That's why I switched from biology to chemistry, because my original biology advisor was not healthy. Healthy communication is so important, and I realized that with organic chemistry. Yeah, it was hard, but it was so much more doable when you have an advisor who meets with you weekly and who pushes you to do better and who's actually there to support you. So.
Good.
My experience was really different. So I had an advisor that was given to me, suggested I had planned on writing a book initially, like a creative sort of short story thing, a bit of a childish take on life and death, actually. And so I was with the head of the English department, Dr. Hayes, and then he would have me write a few things weekly. We bring him in and discuss, and eventually, after I think after 491, I went to go break up with him, and basically be like, "No more thesis for you. I'm going to do a mural. I'll find somebody new." So I went in there, and I was like, "It's not you, it's me," and I wasn't getting into the writing the way that I wanted to. It's fun to say you want to write a book, but then you start it and you're like, never mind. I just didn't see the need for it as I did for the mural. And so I said I was interested in painting a mural. I had already sketched some things out, and he was like, okay, cool. We're going to add on my artist friend as your other advisor, and we're going to keep going. I was like, he didn't let me break up with him. I was actually a little bit upset for a while there, but he ended up really helping me because he knew the thesis process, and the other advisor only knew art. So together they made one advisor. Um, but we didn't really have the same sort of weekly meeting style. If you know artists, they're very hard to find in one place. And so a lot of what it was is them sending me like, can you think about these things? We'll run into each other at some point at Starbucks, and then we'll cross them. And so a lot of it was me drawing, them reviewing, saying, oh, this might not work, and then going back and forth with the drawings until eventually there was something worth sending on. And like going around interviewing businesses, seeing who wants a mural. And then once we did find the post office, it was a whole other thing of getting the federal government to approve my design. I had one design that they sent all the way up, and it got rejected. And then we sent a second one that went all the way up to the National Grand Postmaster, whoever the big man who literally is in the White House for this is, and he approved my second design. So all that had to happen before I even proposed it, because I had to stand there and say this has already been approved and everything else. So this literally took a year before I could propose it. And then once I proposed it and got the approval, there's a whole other like midway step that I also needed probably before I proposed, which was funding. Because a lot of the question was, great plan, how do you pay for it? So I was fortunate enough to be awarded the honors research scholarship, even though I wasn't really doing traditional research. But they gave me enough money to buy paint and wood, which was another change at the last second because the Grand Postmaster changed and he decided you can't paint things on these anymore, but you could put it on wood. So that was a whole other budget change last second, which definitely should have been compensated for. Like looking back and reading my naive little proposal where I was like, nothing could possibly go wrong. My biggest thing with proposing it is be prepared to have significant changes from that document to then the final product, because even I did the majority of my final product stuff over the summer, and everything changed like on the daily, like every couple of hours. So.
I think that's a good point too, though, Emma, is that sometimes what you propose is not necessarily what comes out on the back end of the project, right? Like you think, because the whole point is you're asking a question, and in theory, you kind of know which direction you think the question is going to go, but it doesn't mean that always your outcomes match with what you thought that you would find or what you thought your experience would be. And so I think allocating time for that. I know Ruth's being assigned, more of a science-based inquiry type thing. You're at the mercy of like lab space and materials and things sometimes outside of your control, or there's external forces or people who are in control of things that you need, right? And like a postmaster, a grand postmaster. And so, making sure that you're budgeting time for those things. If you're writing it into that proposal, that those things can shift or change, or you need to make sure that you're communicating with those people about what you need from them. So good. And so what do you think was the, oh goodness, I feel like a lot of people are actually more nervous about the thesis proposal than about their thesis defense, because at that point you don't know what you're going to find, or maybe you're not quite the expert on your subject, so it feels very vulnerable to kind of like throw your idea out there. So what do you think was the biggest piece of advice that you could give on kind of prepping for that thesis proposal defense, getting ready? Because I feel like that's the one people are most nervous about when they come in.
I would have to say it all comes back to who your advisor is, because when you propose, you don't know what your research question is going, like where it's going to lead to. But as long as you have that really solid foundation of literature review that you've already conducted, and not just any literature review, but like literature that you've read that's really focused on the key points that you know that you're interested in. Once you have those things established and you have a really healthy relationship with your advisor, that helps tremendously, because then you can go into the proposal saying like, even though I don't really know if this is going to quote unquote like work out or not, at least I know like I have this really solid foundation, I have a good springboard, and then I also have someone who's going to walk with me and not show me what to do, but really just, I guess, give you courage and like be there for you as you're like working through things. So definitely, yeah, completing a lot of literature a lot of reading beforehand, and having a really good relationship with your advisor.
Yeah, I think Claire's absolutely right. My advisor told me when she thought I was ready to propose and when she thought I was ready to defend, even though I disagreed about defending and prolong that a little bit. But you know, you want to make sure, you know, it's just so important, like Claire said, to have a good advisor and somebody who's honest with you. If your advisor always leaves you feeling happy and they don't ever kind of hurt your feelings, you know, you might need to think about that relationship, because you need honest feedback in order to have a solid proposal and a solid defense. But your advisor should be right there with you and, you know, telling you when they think you're ready.
Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention something about the whole journals thing for science journals. They're daunting. They are convoluted and they are scary in the beginning. But just like, don't be scared to ask your advisor for help in terms of understanding both his publications and publications that you find and the ones that he sends you. Because understanding all that literature is very important to the proposal process. To just understand the background that has happened within the lab, and also just generally literature can be very daunting in journal articles because it's a type of reading style that you may not be familiar with. It's something that I wasn't familiar with coming into college. I had never read a journal article before, and it's okay to not know how to navigate that process. Just be patient with yourself and always ask questions. Never be satisfied with knowing what you know. Never be scared to push yourself. The thesis process is long, but it's doable.
See, mine was really different again because I didn't have a literature review or read anything at all. And so a lot of what I did was argue with the post office, which is not something anybody else is really going to do after me. But what I think is important when proposing your thesis is being confident. I was really, really anxious that I hadn't done enough because I see everybody else doing these theses where they read hundreds of pages or they wrote hundreds of pages. And I was like, I fought with the federal post office, like, really on the DL too. Nobody knew I was fighting them. And it was, I was really nervous the whole time, like visibly shaking because I didn't think my thesis was enough, and I honestly expected them to reject me. And then when I went back in there, they're like, "Are you sure this isn't too much just for one person?" And so a lot of that is, you know, being aware of imposter syndrome and how to combat that, and to not be like, if your advisor let you get to the proposal stage, they probably knew you were okay. I was really pushy, like, I need to propose this soon so that I can get the funding to do this, to do that. And I thought that I was just pushing him and he was just bending, but he actually was approving. So definitely be confident, and your advisor will probably say no if they think no. So.
I think that's solid advice that all of you mentioned. Is ultimately your advisor has as much at stake as you do, and so they don't want to put you in a situation where you're not going to be prepared, and so they are going to do their best to give you feedback, even if that feedback is hard to hear, because they want you to be successful when you go in for that proposal. And so I think that a lot of people get nervous, but in fact, if your advisor is supporting you, they're not putting you in a situation that they don't think that you can handle based on what you've known and based on what you know and what you want to do. Okay, so let's say that they have proposed and the proposal goes well. What are things that you would suggest to kind of keep the ball rolling after the proposal? So really there's a lot of effort that goes into the proposal. It's crafting your idea, it's doing that background and lit review, it's coming up with your methodology, and then your faculty advisor and the Honors College says thumbs up, go ahead and get started. And then it really is on you to carry out, with help obviously and support, but for the most part you're the primary researcher and you start on your project. So we kind of have 3 little topics here that are part of that post-proposal phase, but how do you keep in good contact and regular contact with your faculty advisor? Maybe some tips you have for staying organized as you start to collect information or create information? And last, like, what are some ways that you found to hold yourself accountable to timelines when no one was necessarily over your shoulder telling you when you had to get certain things done by?
I can go first. So for keeping in touch with your advisor, I initially would email back and forth, but then we both realized that for like small talk, basically, like, oh, have you seen the article that I sent you earlier this week? That kind of thing. Email was getting kind of tedious. So I actually had my advisor's phone number and I would text her quite often. I would text her and say, hey, like, I looked at the findings of this article. They look really good. They support XYZ. And she'd be like, great, send it over. And then we also used Zoom quite frequently after hours. So after 5 p.m., like sometimes we would meet. I remember there was a period after I proposed where we were meeting once a week, I think on like Thursday nights at like 8 or 9 p.m. So she was already at home, but she was still able to Zoom me, and we were able to discuss my thesis over Zoom. So that was really helpful. So for keeping in touch, just don't be afraid to reach out even about the little things. And then for staying organized, make sure you have like some sort of method of like saving all of the information that you're reading if you have a lot of literature. So for me, like I would actually download all of these PDFs and just keep them in a folder on my computer. And then also, I don't know how many of you already know this, but through the library, you can actually like, when you log in with your CWID, you can save articles to a folder. And it's kind of like pinning them for like future reading. So if you don't want to download something because it's like, 100, 200 pages long, you can just like pin it and then look at it later when you can. So that's how I stayed organized. And then accountability, just set small deadlines for yourself, like I mentioned earlier. Like maybe write and be like, okay, if I'm writing my actual like thesis, then write a few pages every week, and just set up small deadlines that are easily reachable.
Yeah, I think for me, I mostly stayed in touch with my advisor through email, and then we would meet once a week in person, but we weren't really judicious about that. If we both had something going and it wasn't necessary, then we would just stay in touch over email. But she's also a professor who's really good about checking her email, and you want to make sure that that's your thesis advisor if you're going to do email. As far as staying organized, like Claire said, saving them to the library page. They also had a feature called RefWorks at one time. That was really helpful for creating citations and keeping your sources organized. And then I don't think anyone ever saw it but me, but I made a syllabus for 491 and 490, and it would have dates and the articles I was going to read and what I was going to do. And I had to write it out so that I could see it and tell myself, this is what I'm doing on this day at this time, because I knew if I didn't treat it like a regular course, it would just get kind of set to the side. So just being intentional, and back to organization, the annotated bibliography. If you're going to have a lot of sources, have your citation, go ahead and get that done, and then write 3 or 4 sentences saying what you're going to use it for, what's in there. And with my thesis, I ended up being able to use that bibliography for part of my page count there. So at the end, if anybody had any questions, I could immediately go to the source and say, this is what I found there. So that's really important.
I think for mine, it's really easy. Once Dr. Steins just let me go, it's like, yeah, I could come in today if I wanted to, or I could just stay home and watch Netflix. So definitely accountability for yourself. It's really, really hard, but you just got to think of, well, I want to finish this in 1 year. Okay, what does that look like? Is that feasible? And so then you start breaking down month by month. What do you want to work on? But also knowing that sometimes life will happen and you will derail from that plan, but as long as you keep working towards those next steps and you have steps delineated for yourself and you plan it out, that helps you see the next step, even if it's just, okay, I finished my methodology today, tomorrow I'm going to finish my 1 paragraph of my discussion, and then the next day, and then the next day. And so having the whole plan but breaking it down into small steps is really doable. And also with chemistry and just any thesis, it's really important to just take a step back and ask yourself, what can I handle? And what can I handle in a healthy way? Not just, I can do this, I can go into lab every day, but is that the best thing for me? And to not just succumb to the need to just finish, because you do have to be healthy about it. It can be a toxic standard for any student to just be engulfed in your work, but just take a step back and be patient with yourself.
So mine, yet again, was completely different. I was fortunate enough to have proposed my thesis the week before spring break, and we all know what happened spring break this year. So my entire thesis was basically done in COVID times. And my advisors dropped off the face of the earth to the point of like, I was awarded the grant money on spring break. I got the email and I sent it to them and I was like, I got the money, but you have to do the purchasing because it was like, it's a deal. You have to do the purchasing together. And they didn't answer me for 3 months. I emailed them. I emailed their bosses. I emailed like their secretaries, their friends. Like I was this close to like calling their moms, being like, "Can you please?" Like I honestly thought something happened to at least one of them, until I emailed the art advisor, just him separately, and I was like, "Hey, the lead advisor hasn't answered me in 3 months," and he was like, "Really? Huh." And he answered in like 5 minutes, and I was so angry because I'd been emailing them both at the same time for 3 months, once a week, every week. On Thursdays, they got an email, and he was like, "Oh," and I was like, "Look, this funding has to be spent before July," and this is like mid-June when he finally answered me. And it was this whole chaotic thing where he's like, "Okay, I'll order you the items." I sent him the items. They've been in a cart, like a online shopping cart, for ages. And he's like, "Okay, we're gonna get these items. Just kidding. Can you go to Home Depot like right now and I'll call them?" And it was this whole ordeal every day. I was at Home Depot in a mask, like absolutely panicked because I hadn't been outside since it started. And um, eventually I did get the stuff, but the big thing that you need to do that's kind of unconventional with the thesis is to use your resources and not be afraid to ask anyone for help if you need advice or anything else. For me, I needed a truck, so I had to do the wood panels, which is complete shock. It happened the day I was ordering things, the last day before the grant funding ended. And he was like, "Oh, by the way, wood panels are bust on this mural that day." And so I'm up at Home Depot. I don't know how to choose wood. I know nothing about wood. But my aunt and uncle had just moved into Greenville. They had not been in Texas for a long time, but they moved back to live next with my grandparents. And I called my uncle and I was like, "Are you off work?" And he was like, "I'm about to head back. Can you come to Home Depot right now?" And so he came to Home Depot. He had a truck. He is a woodworker, or he does in his free time. He's on the school board or whatever that is for Greenville ISD. Um, but he helped me. He's like, "So look at this wood. You see these lines. These aren't good lines. You feel this side. You feel that side. There's a hole. You don't want that hole." And so he helped me get all that. We loaded it, everything that we bought up into his truck. And I was thinking, we'll bring it to my house. And he's like, "No, we'll take it out to my shop." So like if they hadn't been there to be my resource, my aunt and uncle, to help me move these massive panels of wood, you can't move that alone. And to take it out to that shop, and then he taught me how to use all of his tools and how to do everything. We didn't even have those tools to do the woodworking. The entire thing, if you've seen the picture, is cut by hand. So every little scallop thing I did by hand. And so it was this whole nightmare that my thesis went from "I'm going to paint a mural" to "I am now a woodworker." And um, it was a lot, but I was able to use my resources to ask my grandparents, "Hey, do you have this weird sandy tool? My uncle wants it." and um, and definitely in COVID times, I was very blessed to have that because I didn't have access to anything in the art department until like the very last second. My advisor was like, "Can you go up to the art building and pick up this projector?" And I didn't even know he had the projector set aside for me, but apparently it was making his assistant angry. And I was able to use the projector to make sure that everything looked right before I painted it. But it was nice to have that as a resource also. I definitely would say the keep in touch with your advisor is key, unless your advisor doesn't want to keep in touch with you, in which case find them and be persistent, and maybe 3 months later they'll answer. I'm glad that nothing happened to them. I haven't seen them still since then, even at my defense. I don't know. I don't think the lead one, I don't know if he just decided he didn't want anything to do with my art, because in the middle of my defense, he answered his phone, and we're on Zoom, and I could see him talking on the phone in my defense. And I was like, this guy, he planned this from the start. So I definitely trust your advisor. I should have just had one do that, unless they're buddies. And that was a long way to get to my point. But basically, COVID times makes it a lot harder if you're not doing research. I definitely should have done research doing that. Especially wearing a mask doing woodworking outside in July.
Yeah, but that was
oh, lovely. But it's not impossible.
Go ahead. I don't think that I have. I was going to turn it over to our audience because I know they've been sticking with us for a while. So I'll kind of wrap up, and then you all can ask any questions that you have of the panel. Because what I really just want you to know is that all of these steps are essentially preparing you for what we would call the big show, earning that pin. However we get the pin to you now, Emma, I don't even know. After the online defenses, but after you research, collect, analyze, write your thesis, produce your thesis, create your thesis, whatever that means, you come in for that final defense, and hopefully the timeline that you've set works for what you want to do, because remember, Dr. Green sets internal timelines each semester of dates you need to have those documents submitted to qualify for different levels of honors, or the last date that he'll watch some of those thesis defense or schedule the thesis defenses. And so the other thing to remember is to allocate time for making edits and improvements. So a lot of times you might push that timeline and think your document's ready to go, and then you may get it back from your thesis advisor and they want to change or rework, something. So just make sure that you give yourself enough padding and time to do what it is that your advisor or your committee is asking of you. But really the final presentation, your thesis defense, is a chance for you to show what you know. I mean, it's the time that you are the most knowledgeable person in the room about your subject, because you've done all of the research. You have done your lit review, you've conducted the study, you've analyzed what you found, and you're there to share that with your committee. And so, as each of the panelists have mentioned, that if you've been working closely with your advisor, they're not going to put you in a situation where you won't be successful. And so it really is a chance for you to really get to brag on yourself a little bit and show like kind of your process and ultimately what you found from your research, and share that with your committee. And so that really is kind of a big celebration, because it's the culmination of all of your work into what those findings are. And I think even though people are a little bit nervous going in, like the sheer relief and like fist pumping that comes after those defenses are over is always one of our favorite days in the office around here, and why we always give everyone a shout out, on Facebook once it's over, because it is a big accomplishment. So for everyone that's still here, do you want to ask any questions of the panel? I can see Ashton thinking. Thank you, Ashton. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Okay. Can you see each other's faces now? Okay, good. Any questions? For our illustrious panel, you're formulating your...
Mentally formulating, yes. So one question for Emma Anderson, with the whole like adding an advisor, or having to like change or like break up with an advisor, did you like, when you completed like the contract with the advisor, how exactly did that work?
See, my advisor was he's like the initial advisor was a really seasoned advisor. He had advised many people before me. So it was to the point that like, I don't even remember the contract. I don't even know if he read it. I think he was just like, here's my signature. If you can forge it, figure it out. Um, or a lot of times I'd send him something and be like, can you sign that? And he'd be like, oh yeah, sure. And he would just like put his hand in the middle of what you need to read and then just sign it. And I'm like, I could have put like your soul belongs to me in the middle of there and you didn't even notice. I don't think he would have cared if I did end up breaking contract and leaving. I think he liked having me around though. Like a lot of our meetings were conversations more than they were anything else. And I think he liked me to stop by and talk about like deep implications in The Walking Dead and other things that we got off topic on. So I think he didn't want to get rid of me. But also, it's important to have the advisor that's like selected or approved by the honors college. They have to have like a special badge of honor. And I think that's why he stuck with me, because the artist that he brought in, he's another professor, but he wasn't officially an honors advisor. And so that's kind of why I needed the English advisor who had nothing to do with me except for signing my papers.
Because I have a similar like predicament where I have two people who are kind of involved, but one is like the official kind of advisor, except there still is no contract. And then one is the one who actually is willing to meet with me weekly and work with me on it. The other one's like, yeah, call me if you get anything, but like you need to do this.
Exactly what I had. I don't know. I never had a contract with the artist either. I'm not really sure about the contract. I actually completely forgot about it until you said that. I think if you do want the other advisor like to not help, you could probably be very straight up with them, because if you're feeling burdened by them, they probably feel the same thing. So just, politely be like, look, I think it would be much easier for everyone if we just did this. What do you think? Make it an option for them, don't demand.
And then another question is, can you do multiple semesters with like 491?
So after you don't accomplish it, they make it incomplete, and then you can accomplish it anytime after, and they'll go back and fix it. I had it incomplete for like 3 years, so don't sweat for the length of incomplete until you get to the very end and they're really mad at you for having incomplete classes. But that's not, you'll be fine.
Yeah, so if you sign up for 491 and you do not complete your proposal by the end of the semester, your advisor reports a grade of I, doesn't positively or negatively affect your GPA, and then the grade gets updated when you actually do your thesis proposal. So if that's the next semester or 3 years later, it's fine, but we'll go back and make sure that grade gets changed on your transcript. But that way you don't enroll in it and it counts against your attempted hours multiple times, or you have to pay for it multiple times. Like that just seems like unnecessary. So you take it once, and then in the semester, if you don't for some reason complete the proposal or complete the defense, you get an incomplete until you do that item.
And so then the next question is, because LIBS 491 is helpful because it is 3 semester hours devoted to like, hey, you have this like counting as your class hours to figure that out. So like if you don't complete it, then do you have to go back to like, okay, I have to take a bunch of classes and now I have even less time to complete my thesis?
They didn't make me take the libs, if that helps you. It did end up getting checked off eventually. As long as you get it done at the same time that you get
when you get ready to do your graduation check, you need to make sure that it's done for them to actually count it.
Just tell the advisors to make sure that they actually count it. Because I actually was meeting with a non-honors college advisor that didn't know what I was doing at all. And I was like, this is it, I promise, this is what they told me. And eventually she's like, okay, we'll just go with it. And it went through, so.
Click check and he says, yes, do it. And then we push that through with your graduation application at that time. So. Claire, you had a question that kind of to you. Oh, I was going to say.
I was going to add on to what Emma, I was going to go off of what Emma said too about the advisor. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone who has potentially never even advised anyone, because my advisor, she had her doctorate, like she received her doctorate a couple years ago, so she was familiar with the research process, but I was the first person that she ever advised, and I know she's advised more people since then, but I reached out to Dr. Reed in the education department first and asked his advice and was like, I'm doing an education thesis. Who do you recommend? And he looked over like the faculty that they had and then recommended Dr. Fields to me. So don't be afraid to reach out to someone higher up first if you don't know anyone in a specific college that your thesis is in, and then kind of working down from there. So, and then someone said that they had a question.
They said, could you give any advice for nursing students and how you balance nursing school and the thesis process?
Yes, nursing school is a whole nother ball game. So coming into the honors college, I had heard of previous nursing students who found that it was very difficult to work on a thesis while in nursing school, which is why I chose a personal goal for me to complete my thesis before I entered nursing school, so before my junior year. So I started HC 300 freshman year, the spring of my freshman year, and then I did 491 in the fall, and then 490, and I defended at the very end of my sophomore year. So that was a little bit wild. And for nursing students, if you can do it and you feel like you can really focus on your thesis those first 2 years, then go for it. Like, I have full confidence. Like, if I could do it, then you definitely can do it. But if you're already in nursing school or you're about to go into nursing school is going to change the way you think. It's going to monopolize your life for just 2 years. But I don't know of anyone who has had much success while in nursing school and also working on a thesis. Most people, it can be very challenging to do both, and so they often end up having to complete their thesis at the end of their senior year or after they have graduated. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Try to get it done before nursing school, but if not, life happens.
And Mariana, to be accepted into the nursing program, they do require, if you're doing a thesis, that your thesis proposal be complete, or you can't qualify for the like the special, I guess, admissions for honor students. So you do at least have to have your proposal or your idea approved so that you can start your research. So the only thing that you would be missing would be actually conducting and then reporting on that research before you start. So as Claire said,
yeah,
that can get a little complicated to do while you're starting the nursing program, but you do at least have to have your proposal done before they'll let you in. So
yeah.
Shayla asked if you could take 491 and 490 in consecutive semesters. Is that enough time? Yes, and you're welcome to, you can defend your proposal at any point. So like if you want to do it the second week of the semester, then you have all the rest of the fall semester and then however much of the spring semester. You can also go ahead and start on your proposal if you have a solid idea and a faculty advisor and you've come up with an idea. You can go ahead and start formulating, researching, doing the lit review on your idea before you actually even register for the class. And then you take the class and you propose early, you get the grade, and then you move on. So there are ways to like cushion, I guess, your time and make sure that you give yourself enough. So, but you do want to make sure you give yourself enough time. All right, well, we're coming up on 1 hour, and I say that only because I know for those of you that have been listening, that could be a long time to sit on a Zoom call. I'm sure this is something we could answer questions and chit chat about all afternoon, but thank you all for tuning in and asking good questions, and definitely want to give a big hand. I think I'm the only one with my camera on though. Big hand to, and Ashton, to our panel for a fantastic bit of insight into each of your individual processes, navigating the thesis and how much insight I know it gave me to share with students, but hopefully everyone here benefited from that. So I sincerely appreciate y'all giving your time to help other students not feel so intimidated by the process. All right. Well, if there are no future questions, then we will release you all. And like I said, panelists, thank you again for your expertise and time. You are much, much appreciated. And then I will export this as a recording. And then if you know of other people that wanted to come today or hear any of this information, just have them reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to share it with them. Okay. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, guys.